right, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for joining me here today. My name is Kelly LeBlanc. I'm the Vice President of Nutrition Programming at Oldways. So we're a nutrition nonprofit dedicated to inspiring people to embrace the healthy and sustainable joys of the old ways of eating. So a lot of our work is focused around heritage diets around the world, and whole grains, of course, play a really important part of that. The Oldways Whole Grains Council is one of the programs that we run at our nonprofit, and really our goal is just to get more people to eat more whole grains. So we do a lot of consumer-facing work to help people find whole grains and understand why they're so great. We do a lot of business-facing work, helping manufacturers create whole grain products and market them. And then we also help the media to write accurate and compelling stories about whole grains. Some of you may be familiar with our whole grain stamp program. So we're a third-party certifier that certifies the gram amount of whole grain in one serving of a product. And we've been doing that since 2005. And so we work with companies, everything from a one-woman show, real small at a farmer's market, to large multinational corporations, and trying to make sure that we have whole grain products available for every segment of the marketplace. So why am I here today? I'm going to spend most of my time sharing market research data on what consumers are looking for when they're shopping for whole grains. Do they even know about whole grains? Do they want to be eating them? Are there other product attributes that they're looking for when they're eating local grains? So just to set the stage here, most of what we previously knew about whole grain consumption came from NHANES, which is our National Nutrition Survey. And that data shows us that breads and cereals are the largest sources of whole grain in the American diet. And it also shows us that Americans are falling very short of their whole grain intake. And that's something that I hope everyone in the room can help with. From eating the delicious pastries this morning to the lunch today, once you start eating these local whole grains just prepared with such care, you just can't help but fall in love with them. So I'm really glad to have you all as a part of this movement. And I did want to make a note about the year of these. So these surveys, because they're large government surveys, they take a long time to analyze all the data. So as you can see here, this graph is from 2012. So lots happened since then. Again, setting the stage of why we wanted to run our consumer survey, we can see from previous market research that the large majority of consumers do recognize that whole grains are healthy. So that's good. Even though there's a lot of confusion about what constitutes a healthy diet, and there's a lot of recognition that there's more than one path to healthy eating. But regardless of the path you choose, it seems clear to most people that whole grains are an important part of that. And then I did also, want to say that our survey dives into a lot of these trends. And I'm sorry about the lighting quality. I don't know if you can actually see the slides that I'm showing you. I think the shades are not operational. That's what I've been told. But if anyone, wants these slides, please come see me after and I'll share them. Or if you write the organizers of this conference, they have my full permission to share them as well. I've got a lot of pie charts coming up. So our survey, we ran it this summer from late May to early June 2023. It's census representative of 1,500 American adults. And we really asked them a lot of questions about their whole grain consumption and their habits. And since this is the Mid-Atlantic Grains Conference, we did go back in and see if there were differences in responses between Mid-Atlantic respondents versus the nation as a whole. And there were no statistically significant differences for any question. So I think it's definitely fair to say that these results are going to be representative of the customers in this region. And why we conducted this survey, because the latest survey we have about whole grain consumption is from pre-COVID. Like, so much of how we eat, how we shop, how we cook has changed a lot and very rapidly. So there were kind of 6 main findings that we have. Consumers do want to increase their whole grain intake. The whole grain stamp is breaking through. Consumers want to know the whole grain content of their foods, and they appreciate third-party certifications. Consumers, especially the younger demographics, the Gen Z and millennials in particular, are feeling sensitive to food prices more so than they were in the past, and that the millennial generation is leading the way when it comes to choosing whole grains for sustainability. So American consumers are actively seeking whole grain products. A majority say they choose whole grains at least half the time. And 26% tell us they nearly always choose whole grains whenever they're available, with significantly fewer people saying that they never or almost never choose whole grains. In many demographic groups, your health-conscious consumers, your plant-based consumers, and parents of young children are going to be even more likely to choose whole grains. More than half of the respondents have increased their whole grain consumption in the past 5 years. But when asked if they're getting enough whole grains, 77% tell us they think they need to increase their intake. Breads, breakfast cereals, and grain sides are the foods most commonly consumed as whole grain. And this does line up with what we saw from the NHANES data from a few years ago. Most consumers wish they ate more whole grains, particularly breads, pasta, crackers and snacks, and grain sides. And we also did some research on our whole grain stamped product database, which is more than 13,000 products. And we found that there was a few product categories where there were very few whole grain options on the market. And that included pizza crusts, baking mixes, like if you think of a muffin or pancake mix, and then just more obscure categories like yogurt and beverages. So I think these are areas where there's room for innovation from people in the room to try and fill some of those gaps where people are wanting to find a whole grain product in that category. Of those who eat whole grain foods, a lot of people saying bread is their favorite. And even though we hear that whole grain pasta can be very difficult to produce, we do hear from consumers that it's a product that they're interested in. Nearly half of consumers choose whole grain options at restaurants at least somewhat often. So whether we're getting these whole wheat croissants or brown rice in our burrito bowls, it's great to see that there's more and more options starting to be available, including some at reasonable price points. Half of consumers eat whole grains for breakfast, most or all of the time. 85% of consumers say they trust the whole grain stamp, with the Gen Z, that younger demographic, coming up even higher. 4 out of 5 consumers use the whole grain stamp as a part of their purchasing decisions, with just over half of those looking at other factors like sugar and sodium. Another shift we're seeing is that a growing number of consumers say they would question a product's claims about whole grain if they didn't see the stamp. And I think that kind of responds to that sort of consumer distrust around big business, and especially in certain demographics. 65% of young shoppers and 67% of parents with kids would question a product's claims if they didn't see the whole grain stamp. Close to half of all consumers recognize it, with even more Gen Z. And over half the consumers who recognize the stamp look for it when shopping. And 55% of consumers would be more likely to purchase a product bearing the 50% plus stamp than the basic stamp, which indicates that consumers are looking for products in which more than half the grain is whole. Like, you can have a product with a little bit of whole grain or a lot of whole grain, and they seem to be drawn to products that are really going above and beyond. A significant majority of consumers want the whole grain of products to be included on the packaging, which is what the whole grain stamp offers to consumers. However, the reason we got started doing this about 20 years ago is that unlike nutrient content like sodium or sugar, there's not actually a lab test that exists that can quantify this. Determining whole grain content requires expertise in what counts as a whole grain versus a refined grain and what doesn't count as a grain at all. And so as a third-party certifier, our team is reviewing these products individually, and we do find and routinely correct errors in the submissions. And so I think, just really glad that there's that extra layer of review. And as more consumers desire whole grain products, it's really important to make sure that the claims are consistent and certified for accuracy to help maintain that consumer trust. About 2/3 of consumers say seeing third-party packaging symbols gives them more confidence in the product they're buying. When we asked shoppers to rank the usefulness of various types of package labeling, the whole grain stamp was the second most highly rated, with only the nutrition facts panel receiving higher marks. And most consumers do trust the ingredient list, nutrition facts panel, allergen info, gluten-free certifications, and non-GMO verified label. And most consumers also trust the whole grain stamp, but only about half of them trust a product's own claims about whole grain content if it hasn't been certified. I'm just keeping an eye on my time here because I don't want to run into yours. So I'm sure you've noticed in where you all live that inflation has caused food prices to increase at alarming rates around the country, and consumers are feeling the effects. Our survey found that cost is the most significant barrier to eating more whole grains, especially for younger generations. And that's not to say that in every category the whole grain option is necessarily more expensive than the refined grain option. I think this sentiment just expresses more of a frustration with being able to eat in a way that they feel aligns with their health goals. And I think everyone in this room recognizes that a lot of these locally produced whole grain products, do require a little bit more investment a lot of the times. So top influences on purchasing decisions include flavor, health, familiarity, price, and a desire to try new foods. And just a note, the percentage of consumers who told us that price is a major factor is slowly ticking up. It was 51% this year, but only 47% in 2021. So again, flavor being top, and I think a lot of the foods we tried today are so wonderful. So if we can, get these products in more mouths, that can make a big dent in improving whole grain intake. As this slide indicates, stakeholders across all sectors of the food and nutrition space have a role to play when it comes to helping consumers make the switch to whole grains. American consumers believe that reducing cost, increasing variety and availability, and providing education are the best ways to encourage more people to eat more whole grains. Efforts to achieve price parity between whole grain and refined grain products may be more important than ever right now. And here at the Oldways and the Oldways Whole Grains Council, we do a lot of consumer education through our website, blog, social media, email newsletters, and media interviews. And of course, we welcome everyone to take advantage of the free resources on our website and join us in spreading the word about how wonderful whole grains are. Fad diets that involve low or no carb eating patterns are on the decline. This year's survey found that fewer people say they are avoiding carbs, 16% in 2023 compared with 18% in 2021. And among Gen Z and millennial consumers, the numbers are even lower. Only 10% of these groups are avoiding carbs. And while we often assume that low carb dieters would have lower whole grain consumption because whole grains are a major source of carbs, we found that those who said they avoid carbs are actually more likely to look for high fiber foods when shopping, look for whole grains when shopping, say that healthy food is important to them, nearly always choose to eat whole grains, and have increased their whole grain intake a great deal in the last 5 years. So I think what this really means is that when people say that they are avoiding carbs, maybe these carb sensitive consumers are really differentiating between products based on the nutritional quality of different carbohydrate sources and gravitating towards these higher quality carbs like whole grains. Over half of American consumers have some idea of what gluten is, but only 8% can fully define it correctly. This year, significantly more consumers correctly identified that gluten helps dough stretch and rise, and significantly fewer consumers reported that they don't know what gluten is. Although about a quarter of consumers have told us they have cut back on gluten somewhat, 94% of people say that they do eat gluten some or all of the time, meaning that they are not following a true gluten-free diet. This year, significantly more people said they did not avoid gluten than in 2021, and significantly fewer people said that they always avoid gluten. And if you look at Google Trends, gluten-free as a search term peaked around 2014 or 2015, depending on if you put the hyphen in it or not, and has kind of plateaued since then. About a quarter of consumers have supposedly cut back on gluten, but are not following a true gluten-free diet. So again, fad seems to be on the decline. 3 out of 4 consumers who say they always avoid gluten are doing so without a medical diagnosis. Only 1.33% of respondents told us they avoid gluten due to a medical diagnosis, which lines up with the estimated prevalence of celiac disease. So health is definitely the leading motivator for people for choosing whole grains, but it's not the only one. Whole grains have so much more to offer. Sustainability is increasingly a motivation for choosing whole grains, especially for millennials. Millennials are significantly more focused on the sustainability benefits of whole grains compared to other generations, with 24% of this group saying they choose whole grains for that reason. Millennials are more likely to choose foods that are environmentally sustainable and good for the climate, and are more likely to buy certified organic food. I'm sure you saw, a couple years ago, the much publicized Eat Lancet report that focused on diets that the overlap between good for the planet and good for people, and whole grains were a key area of their recommendations. And I think, maybe this is coming up as a motivation for people. I'm sure we all experienced, yes, or were you raising your hand? Okay. I'm sure you remember the wildfires this summer. There was flooding in Vermont and New England where I live. And so I think climate is more top of mind and is impacting people's day to day in a way that it perhaps wasn't 5-10 years ago. 2/3 of consumers consider whole grains to be sustainable and environmentally friendly. 72% of millennials say they think of whole grains when they think of foods that are sustainable. And the only food group that scored higher among whole grains was fruits and vegetables. And, as we start to see the risks and benefits of different food production systems, it's really easy to see why grains have been at the core of our diets for millennia. While fruits and vegetables are incredibly nutritious, they're not quite as energy dense and are a little more difficult to store and transport for year-round enjoyment. And grains are, still remain one of the most important sources of food worldwide that don't require as many inputs as other food groups. And then I just wanted to jump through a few other interesting takeaways from our surveys. So although taste is ranked by some people as a barrier to eating whole grains, there are actually more consumers who ranked taste as a benefit. And so I would definitely, challenge everyone to push back against the notion that people think whole grains taste bad. I don't think that's necessarily the case, because we see more and more people making a splash and really showing the culinary versatility of these ingredients.
Can you go to the comment about Gen Z for a second?
Sure. So our survey also found that for Gen Z, not knowing how to prepare whole grains and not being in the habit of buying them are particularly significant barriers. And so, for this demographic, perhaps whether we're offering products, easing them into the food group in more of a ready-to-eat format, or by meeting them where they're at, which is a theme that came up, I think, from you this morning, with, maybe recipe tutorials on platforms that they're on TikTok or things like that. Could be a useful strategy, especially when you're doing some sort of a product launch and want to make sure that it can appeal to groups across different demographic ages. Young consumers, parents of young children, and plant-based eaters are more often in the habit of choosing whole grains. So when developing products for children, for Zoomers, for vegetarians, incorporating whole grains, we think should be a key part of that R&D journey, because these are the demographics that are going to be looking for them. And so the whole grains can be a really attractive characteristic of that product formulation. On the other hand, older consumers are more likely than younger consumers to avoid carbohydrates, added sugar, and prepared meals when shopping. They also report being less likely to choose organic or environmentally sustainable foods, but they say they're more likely to buy food from farmers markets. And as we saw in the previous slide, older consumers are less likely than younger consumers to be in the habit of choosing whole grains. This is one of my favorite questions that we ask, because at the Whole Grains Council, journalists always write us and say, what's the next quinoa? Everyone wants to know about the next ancient grain or what people have heard of. So we gave people a list and asked what they've tried, what they've heard of, and what they've actually eaten. And I know this is small and difficult to read, but basically what you'll find is that while quinoa and farro are considered to be the really trendy or popular grains that we get asked about often, the reality is that the most popular, as in well-known whole grains, are really the most common ones. So whole wheat, oats, brown rice are the most well-known overall. The most people saying it's one of their favorites. And we have asked this question a couple times over the years, and we do see some growth in a lot of the lesser known whole grains, which is awesome. I know this year is the International Year of Millets, and we have seen an increase in millet awareness, which is great. But yeah, it's just cool to see like what's breaking through. And I sometimes forget, like, you know, oh, not everyone eats amaranth for breakfast. Like, you know.
Is there a place where we can find that millet? Like, what's the best place to find the trend in millet awareness?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions about numbers, you can definitely write me. Please come up and get my card after, because I know, you know, you might not be able to see the exact statistic on the slide, but I'd be happy to share that. Half of American consumers are eating more home-cooked meals, and over a third are eating more whole grains. And significantly more consumers are eating more whole grains, and more consumers report eating fewer whole grains, is how I wanted to say that. They're also doing more home baking and ordering less takeout. The vast majority of consumers report that they're more likely to eat whole grains in their home versus when they're out at a restaurant or something. And so what we suspect might have happened is that, you know, because 52% of consumers report that they're eating more home-cooked meals, we believe that this has created more opportunity for people to eat more whole grains, since they're most likely to eat them in the home. And we also found that during the early days of the pandemic, there were a lot of supply chain challenges at the grocery store. So we definitely heard from consumers who maybe were in the habit of buying white rice or all-purpose flour or some type of refined grain, who grabbed a whole grain product because that was the only product like on the shelf that they could get their hands on, and found that they actually really liked it. And so it's been cool to see more people awaken to the wonderful flavors of whole grains.
Question.
Yes.
What year did you say this survey was done?
So this was done in 2023, actually late May to early June. But we've been running this survey. We did it in 2021, 2018, and 2015. But yeah, these are all from just a few months ago.
And what is the NHANES? Is that done by your organization, or that's like a national?
No, that's the government
Okay.
run, or that's our National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. It's hundreds of thousands of people, and they use a more rigorous methodology. Like, they ask people about all aspects of their diet. You know, we were really just looking at like the grain food component, and you know, slightly less burdensome in length. And they do take a lot longer. Like, it comes out 4 years after the fact, which for us, we feel like the food space moves so quickly that, like, you know, again, all they have right now is pre-COVID stuff. So it's cool to get a little more of a real-time look at what people are eating or what they say they want to eat. It's kind of neat. The vast majority of consumers are omnivores, meaning that they eat both plant foods and animal foods. 15% of consumers who say that buying healthy food is important to them eat some variety of a plant-based diet, compared with only 12% of total respondents. Whole grains are obviously a very nutritious and versatile food group that can really appeal to people of widely varying dietary philosophies, based on which benefits and characteristics they're looking for. And I feel like you teed us up so well, because it's like you could go on and on about why whole grains are so wonderful. And so this is just kind of a peek at why we're doing what we're doing. Consumers who eat some version of a plant-forward diet, and we're using this loosely, vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, plant-based. These are consumers who prioritize foods that are healthy, whole grain, sustainable, and organic. Flavor and price are less of a concern for these individuals. Instead, they're really shopping for foods that represent their values. Consumers who are health conscious also look for whole grain, organic, or sustainable foods, and they buy from local producers more frequently. So this is a good audience for y'all. This means that health conscious consumers, including whole grains, may not be enough by itself. For this demographic, we might want to be developing a product that's whole grain and certified organic, whole grain and contains a lot of fiber, or whole grain and made from local grain. 86% of consumers say they read packaging labels like the nutrition facts panel at least some of the time, with half of consumers reading them often or all the time. When deciding what to eat, consumers most commonly consider how tasty, healthy, and nutritious a food is. However, 46% of the people who said taste was important placed it among their very top, whereas only 20% of people who said health was important placed it at their very top. And these numbers add up to way more than 100 because they could pick more than one of what was important to them. And contrary to popular belief, food and taste preferences are not set in stone. They can evolve over time in response to different cultural cues, as well as in response to exposure of different foods and flavors. So when it comes to nurturing this palate for local whole grains, or really any food for that matter, persistence is the key. So with this in mind, it stands to reason that consistently offering whole grain foods as the norm can actually help people develop a palate for and even a preference for whole grain options. And we do have a really great webinar on this on our website. So, how can producers of local grains benefit from these trends? When looking at products that are meeting consumer needs, health conscious consumers are going to be more likely to shop local. So is your product incorporating healthful qualities like whole grains? Is there a gap in the marketplace you can fill? Earlier we looked at some of the product categories where there just was very low representation of whole grain options, that being baking mixes, pizza crusts, and then there were some other categories where consumers said they wanted to be eating more whole grain categories, like pasta is one that comes to mind. I want to drill down on that last bullet about cost. So for cost conscious shoppers, can you experiment with lower cost formats or grain blends? I had the pleasure of speaking with some farmers who were doing a really cool heritage wheat variety in their area up north, and they approached a baker in their town and were like, we're making this awesome whole grain flour, can you bake some products with it? And he was like, what's this gonna cost me? And so they were like, okay, give us your recipes and we'll do the math and tell you how much it would add to the cost of it. And so they went through a couple of his popular items, and to convert his bread to using all of this flour, it would triple the cost, because bread is just all flour and water, and you're selling it by the loaf typically. Where they found that for his cookie recipe, if they replaced it all, it increased the cost per cookie by 5 cents. And so that's where they started with him, because if you're making a batch of cookies, let's say it makes 2 to 4 dozen, there was really a much lower barrier for entry for that baker to kind of get his feet wet and start messing around with that local product. And as a dietitian, like I don't necessarily want people to start at cookies, but I think that's just an example of like thinking about different ways that we can play with the formulation and see, you know, not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but where can we start and make sure we're offering something for customers at every step of that journey, and at every income level as well. And then I think DJ will talk about this a little bit later about, you know, telling a story with your product and making your label work for you and how you can make sure that consumers are really understanding what they're getting when you just have very few touch points with that consumer. I know most of you are all familiar with the Bread Lab, but I really like this article, Breeding Away from All Purpose. I would recommend reading it in its entirety. Commodity wheat was developed with the intention of removing the bran and the germ. So it doesn't really matter if the bran is bitter if you're just gonna toss it out anyway. So if we're gonna be developing whole grain products that taste better and perform better, then we're gonna need to start back at the farm level and breed with those qualities in mind so that it does what it needs to do for the end user. And I think this is really where you all can play a huge role and where the diversity of local grains can have a distinct advantage, because these rich flavor complexities in local grains are really concentrated in these bran and germ fractions. And so you're not going to take all this care to grow this really awesome grain and then sift off the part that differentiates it from everything else out there. And so that's why we have seen, even though we work with producers at all levels of economic scale, from very, very small to very, very large, the local grains movement has really been a great stimulus for interest in whole grains more broadly. And this is like a start of, you know, just a drop in the bucket of some organizations, you know, that should be on your radar for troubleshooting, or if you're looking for more resources. There are plenty more, but my slide was getting pretty full at that point. We have Cascadia Grains, the Bread Lab, moving towards the middle of the country, Northern Crops Institute, Artisan Grain Collaborative, UCC Grain School, Common Grain Alliance, Maine Grains, Northeast Grain Shed, Northern Grain Growers. The list goes on and on, but there's a lot of really awesome people working in this field. So I'm gonna get ready to close here, but you know, taking a broader look, like in our very anxious time right now, when a lot of food and life in general can feel fake and unreal and untrustworthy, local grains have really captured the public's attention by distinguishing themselves as real foods with an honest history. So by turning toward the grains of the past, the grains that have nourished humanity before technology and globalization have really had their way with us, nostalgic consumers can really establish a sense of connection with a bygone era by putting their money where their mouth is. And I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth with what you're going to touch on, but I think, you know, I'm really excited to see what DJ has to say on this communication topic. So thanks for your time, and if you have questions, hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. If not, please come find me. And this is my contact. It's KELLY at Oldways with an S PT.org. That's Oldways Preservation Trust. So thank you.
So my presentation, what I'm going to talk about is kind of how do we change those numbers? How do we tell stories? And not wait for somebody else to tell those stories too. So, and just, I'll do a very brief thing too on who I am. The biggest thing is that about 15 years ago, I tried starting a farm and then traveled the country and started looking at what works, what doesn't work. And after a long time, I just got obsessed with really the storytelling of that. So I do filming, photography, put on events, consult farms to diversify their portfolios. And really a large part of it is figuring out who is the next generation of, especially on farmer, but then also the value add producers that add to that. But who's the next generation and how are they not looked at as starving artists, but craft artisans? And it's really that perspective change that helps the value of this, that what I call the $3 gap, but it's more like a $5 gap between, say a burger that's $10 and a burger that's $15. And a lot of it is the story. And some of the other speakers have kind of touched on different elements of this. And especially during the panel this morning as well. So what I'm going to do is kind of talk a little bit about on the larger scale, how do we look at the scope and define that of why are we telling? First off, how many people here are bakers? Cool. Any millers? Cool. Farmers? Yeah. Okay. Cool. I spend most of that time around farmers, so I should know where it was. But what we're going to get into too is kind of right now a little bit on, has anybody heard of brand story versus narrative marketing? Got one yes. So a lot of the times what we're trying to figure out and do is figure out who the hero is. So when you're trying to tell a story, really it's whatever organization you are, and when we get this pulled up, that's not
the right, no?
Nope.
That was mine.
Should be heard. I sent it over to Libby on Friday. So the difference between brand story and narrative marketing is the fact that you have finding out who the hero is. So are you telling your story from your perspective? And hopefully we'll get this up, but we'll have examples of for farmer, for miller, and for baker as well, because there's different things. And then I'll dive into a little bit of 4 photos that every farm, every business basically should have to tell their story. The biggest thing is that nowadays in food is that good food really doesn't sell itself anymore. It used to, and it doesn't. But a clear and concise story can. And I always like to add in, just please be honest too. That's really appreciated, I think, by everybody. So be truthful about that too. Don't try to stretch it too much. But being clear and concise in the story that you're telling. When you're trying to determine the difference between brand story and narrative marketing, when I was talking about that hero that you're selecting, the big difference is, are you the hero? I'll use the farmer as the example. Is the farmer the hero in terms of, I'm telling my story about who I am, why I'm doing this, the who, what, when, where, why? Or am I talking about the consumer as the hero, right? And the consumer being the hero is much more on like, you're buying this product and you're doing the great thing, right? So it's the same thing if you're a miller, let's say, you could say that in terms of, we're gonna tell people the story of our mill, why we did it, why we started it up, what we're milling. Or it's, these are the people that buy from us. These are the bakers. And in that case, the bakers are the hero, right? And they're the consumers. So these are the people doing this great work with the things that we've created. And so that's something that it allows that ability for people to, a lot of the times you'll find that there's going to be a balance of those two things, but it's just a lens to be able to talk about it and to be able to see also, most of the time I do a lot of bundles. I fill people's silos with content. So a lot of the times when we're doing those kind of projects, I will try to ask people that too. Who is your hero? Who do you want to have be seen? And a lot of the times, especially for farmers, it's, I know you don't want to be in front of camera or like, there's this kind of distancing behind it, but one thing to really remember is that when you're telling your own story, people don't really see you, they see themselves, right, through you. And you become that conduit for them to believe in those things again, whatever, that you're trying to push out into the environment as well. And it really is more than just what that food product is. And that's why it's so important. That value add that gets people to spend a little bit more. And we're talking about, I'm going to generalize here, but for the most part, let's say bread. We're talking about getting people to buy like $10 to $12 loaves of bread. That is very different than the commercial form of it. And you have to, in marketing, you're combating Tony the Tiger, right? Like that's what you're up against. And a lot of money has gone into that animal. So you're trying to figure out a good way to be able to tell that story. And same thing, relate that to the people that you're getting involved with. So it really helped to have visuals for visual storytelling. This is what I do. Oh, nice! That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I promise I was prepared.
Okay. I'm just gonna transfer it over on this flash drive
Oh, cool.
since I can't find mine. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good. Can you go down a couple slides and I can remember what the next thing was? See, that's me. We don't care about that. Yeah, brand story. Which worked best? Keep going. Okay, we'll do the 4 photos everyone should have. Okay, so I usually talk about this. I work at a lot of farmers markets, help them build out. I've been trying to turn farmers markets into incubators. Like how does that build your business? Because that's really your test plot in a sense for whatever it is. And then you move on, whether it's brick and mortar, whatever the goal is. And I think we talked about this in terms of scaling. How big do you want to scale? And thinking about that in terms of your story, because your story should be leading where you're going, right? Where you want to be at the end of the day. So when I say 4 photos that every farmer should, usually I say farmer should have. It's like if you have a vending booth and you could only have 4 photos sitting up on a printed out sign, those 4 photos should be able to give people at least 3 to 4 questions, not answers, right? And the most important thing to provide people with is also just a better question to ask. When they're trying to figure out too, whether it's just like asking about a grain varietal or where you grow it, giving people that option to have a question empowers them so much more than filling them with a bunch of answers that you'll never satisfy. So when I go through this, I'll show you too. And it kind of breaks it down into four elements of being able to connect that story from wherever you're starting and going through that journey. Because you want people to join you at the journey where they're being handed that product, right?
Woohoo!
How do I hit the screen?
That's a great question.
Oh, good.
That button?
Nope.
Oh, well,
Technology.
full screen mode. Can you do that again?
Yeah. You know what? Doesn't matter. We'll just keep going. Oh, there you go. Cool. Hi, so 4 photos that everyone should have. and they're still light, so it doesn't really matter. Anyways, so for the farmer, and I've kind of broken it down on the side over here too. What I did was in the bold, you can see it's just on the farm, the land itself, its environment, and on the plate. And what I'll take you through kind of is how you're doing that and why you're doing that in the first place. So seeing the farmer on the farm, identify yourself. If anybody knows Pete Sisti, he's cool. So he is out here on that picture on the far side too, and you can see Pete, you can see he's in front of his truck in this case too, because it has a great license plate, and you have the wheat there too. The most important thing too, and I see this, it doesn't matter if it's vending or if it's on your website, if a press release comes out or some magazine contacts you and says, hey, we'd like to do a story on you, have some of these things. It's great to say, or a conference you get asked to go to, like these opportunities to tell your story. It's great to have this kind of an ensemble. So on the farm there itself, seeing the land. The land itself is very important. Now again, this is the farmer perspective, so we're trying to take people from soil to sale, right? So we have a picture of wheat over here too though. It just validates the fact that I'm the person that is here, this is what I'm taking care of. If you don't want your face being on there, there's ways around that too. You can take shots where it's like side profile or from behind, whatever it is. A lot of the times though, to be honest, I just tell most of them, I get to know them for a little bit and tell them to get over it. But it is really important, right? People tell me this as an artist too, a lot of the times. If people buy a piece of my artwork, 50% they're buying what they're seeing. The other 50% is they're buying me, which sounds weird. But, and really when you're doing this, seeing the land itself and being on the farm, the next one though is seeing the food item in its environment. So connect those two things together. So you can see in that one, I just have Pete's hands and he's handling that wheat that's been harvested. Actually, when we were there shooting on that day, he was doing his last test before deciding to harvest or not. And then the last one is seeing the food, quote unquote, on the plate. Now, for a farmer, you can do this one of 2 ways. It really depends. Are you selling wholesale or are you selling direct to consumer? So if you're selling wholesale, like in this case too, he's not selling a lot of, so I have a picture here. This is actually at Woodson's Mill, Deep Roots Milling, where he was dropping off. It was actually one of the first days. I was just going to hang out with the guys. And then they were like, this guy Pete's coming to drop off his wheat. And I was like, cool. So we got a picture of that, right? So, but that tells that story and shows, and if he's selling to those folks, like that miller then can see, look, this is how I show up, this is how you're gonna get that, right? For other farmers that are doing more direct to consumer, this has more to do with what does the product look like that they're going to receive, and how are they gonna see that? It also helps sometimes to have that food item prepared and on a dish. Talk to a chef, somebody else that you know, they're friends with, like, hey, can you just either take that picture or whatever way that you can get that. It's great for people to be able to see, not just at, especially at a market or somewhere else too, to not just see that item and say like, oh, this is it, where they can imagine it already being in their home, on their plate, right? And that helps them then go ahead and confirm that purchase. For the next example, miller. So this is Deep Roots Milling. So same thing, seeing the producer at the mill. So I have both the guys over here, not Charlie, but Aaron and Ian, and they're putting on the runner stone and moving that around though. So again, it identifies who the people are that are doing this. It's funny when you go to farmers markets, a lot of the times it's hard for people to be like, that's what a farmer looks like, or that's what a miller looks like. People don't have that conception, so we need to help them identify that in the first place. Then the next one in this case is seeing the grain itself, identify the source. So in this case, the source for the mill is the grains coming in. In this case, there was a mixture of bloody butcher corn and I don't know what the other type of corn, what is the other type of corn?
Hickory King and bloody butcher mixed together.
Yeah, that. So, and then same thing, and then it becomes seeing the food item in its environment, connect the two. So in that case, I have a product shot that is tied in to being able to see the mill behind it, what would be happening, again, that association of where this product is actually coming from. And the last one for on the plate, I would have gone over it in an earlier About Me slide, but after I did this whole story, and I'll share that too about with Edible, I got into a focaccia war with my assistant. And we've just been battling each other back and forth and saying, I will destroy you at the beginning of our conversations, and then teaching each other how to make these breads. So for us, we're having fun making content in the process, and I ended up, I think like 2 nights ago, I made a 2.5 pound hamburger and used 2 focaccias as the buns. So like I took it too far in the era of competition. This one was like a fig and rosemary focaccia. But anyway, same thing. Then people can imagine, I get this product, what do I do with it? And they can actually see something along that journey. This would also be more for, Deep Root sells wholesale, but also does sell direct to consumer. So it's the same thing, people being able to see it on the plate as a finished item, transformed along the journey. Then we have an example of a baker. So this is Heather and Little Hat Creek Farm. So same thing. So for the bakery, again, a lot of these things are the same points. It's identify yourself, identify the source, connect the two, and then give the consumer perspective, right? So where people can see it as it's gone through this journey. So in this case, same thing. You can see Heather, you can see the bread, right? It connects those two. You can see that product before it transformed, right? And same thing, people are very intrigued by that. Honestly, it's because they don't know much about that. Like seeing what dough looks like, or as right before it's going in, just the stages of that process is part of that journey that it adds value for them to be a part of that journey, and they feel like they've gone somewhere with you. Connecting the two, same thing. I usually go for hand shots of a lot of things, but same thing. If they have this up at their market booth, and you can change some of these things out. Like this is actually their booth at the market from the backside, so it's not what the consumer would see necessarily, but being able to see that booth or that setup, right? A lot of the times what you're doing is just going through that, and in these, I'll also kind of touch on that brand story versus narrative marketing. So if you're doing the consumer perspective, seeing it on the plate, that's much more of that narrative marketing. When you're talking about identifying yourself, that's much more of brand story. So you can have a mixture of those things. I think it's just a healthy lens to be able to look at it through and see, just remind yourself, who is the hero, right? Who and it doesn't mean that all the glory should go to one area. It really has a lot more to do with where are you focusing that narrative to help people identify value, right? And if it's in what you're doing, I personally try to do this with all the agricultural and food. I do a lot of culinary cultural anthropology and all these other things. It's trying to find a space where people are going to just value that so much more and feel like they are going along on that journey, right? And they want to be a part of that. So the other bit that I'm going to talk about next is there's a CGA toolkit. So there are resources that they have available, hashtags, kind of preset things. So what I'm going to, you can find that on their website, and they can go into that much more. This is kind of like directly pulled from it. But what I'm going to go over next, though, is kind of the application of that and why that's important, why collaboration is so important. We've talked about this in some of the other workshops. Really have to collaborate, and that's the only way this succeeds. And it's tying together that full journey of the things I just showed you, that breakdown. Farmer, miller, baker. Well, guess what? If you have content that helps you're a miller, and then the baker can be able to put up a picture in their bakery of that mill. Now they can tell a story. And actually do that with the gallery. I'll go around to restaurants, and if the farmer has validated the restaurant and told me they source from us regularly, I'll tell them we can put up some of these photos in your establishment so that your servers, whoever else, can point to that, reference it, and say, this is what we're doing. This is who we get it from. So in terms of collaborative marketing, so recently we partnered with Edible Blue Ridge. If you guys have not seen that issue that's over there, the grain issue, grab one. If you have a bakery or something like that, put it in the bakery and let other people read it. What we ended up doing on this project, again, in terms of collaborative marketing, was I made a series of social media reels. So like how a water-powered stone mill works. I had filmed every component of following the water wheel all the way through to where the grains are coming out, and then put that together with audio of Aaron just talking about what all the pieces and the parts were, right? We also did a bunch of interviews. So I put those on video and then pulled those were actually the interviews we used to write the 3 articles in Edible, had all the photographs in there too. And then I was able to take all of those interviews and I cut them into like 15 to 20 minute interviews and put them online. Now the point of all this is every time we put up a social media post, we either asked to collaborate with somebody too, so either Edible, with Common Grain Alliance, with the baker, the farmer, if they had an account, right? If they had something, they didn't have to make a post. Yay, right? But it also allowed for that to be able to collaborate with those things, and now they can use those as reference materials to be able to get involved. And same thing with the Edible Blue Ridge. Before the episode came out, or the issue came out, we went ahead and put some of the pull quotes actually from the articles into social media videos that were from the web. You guys don't all have enough time to do this stuff. I barely did, but the point is that what helps so much, and we watched the analytics too. I'm not really a numbers person as much, but when we watched some of those analytics, like all of those collaborative posts did so much better, and tagging other people in that. I went around this morning, got to the class this morning, and then went ahead and asked who all was involved in this, and then I went ahead and tagged that. My assistant asked me to get a video clip of me doing this, and I was like, no. What I was gonna do instead was ask if anybody has an iPhone right now, if you can, take it out at some point in the rest of what I'm presenting right now, take a video clip of that. If you post that, I will repost that. So it's the same thing, doing those kind of things. Like if you were in somebody else's workshop or later on today, do that same thing. It helps them, it's us looking out for each other. And I think I wrote that in there somewhere and I forget, but yeah. It provides a great opportunity for a quick way to support the network and your neighbors. And just remembering that those are the things that you can do in small ways too, but when you're building out, if somebody wants to do a story on you, if somebody wants to get that narrative out, that's great. Otherwise, you can go back to those 4 photos. At least have that so that you can be able to put those online, share them with others, and then be able to collaborate. Because without doing that, it's only going to be your piece of the story. It's not going to be the entire narrative, and we really need that to be able to kind of keep this story going, because otherwise it goes all the way back to the farm and the farmer. Even if you're at the other end as the baker, that's incredibly important. But these are the things that I think that are going to kind of save and help foster the Common Grain Alliance and other things like it too, and it adds value all the way because you know how much work went into it from beginning to end. Choosing the most effective platform. So in terms of doing this, this is kind of a hodgepodge group of very different things, but it's just know your audience, know those consumers. So if you are the farmer and you're selling wholesale, then just know that you don't need to put out pieces on like the bakery itself. Necessarily, you're trying to get this to the millers and others. So you may not need, I always bring this up. I personally did not like social media. It's why I got into this. If I don't like something, I like learning more about it. But if you're going to use, social media is free, and I love when people tell me that, but your time is not. So be really effective with it. I am not here to promote and say you should be on every platform and you should get yourself out there in that way. Be very, very intentional with how you're going to use your time telling your story. And think about that too. So if it is only Instagram that you need or something else instead of a website, great, you can do that. But otherwise, if you're going to be on a lot of these things, think about how you're going to go about doing that, because this is a lot of time that we're talking about and energy. So that's where I kind of get into the next thing about filling your content silo. So when you're thinking about marketing yourself, unless you're hiring like a marketing coordinator or somebody to do your marketing or come out and do shoots, I think this is something that it's an in-between. And maybe every once in a while that's a great thing to do. Get a photographer, get somebody out there, call me, that's fine. But otherwise though, I think it is something that we have to think about. How do we do this? How do we gain some of that autonomy in our marketing? So one way is taking photos during the season. Even if you're not going to use them, don't worry about it. Next year's not going to be like drastically different. And it's the same thing with a lot of things like, let's say things are in harvest at some point. You need that content 2 to 3 weeks beforehand. So you really need to get it the year before, harvest it, fill your silo, have it for the next year. So I always tell folks, if they're going to be doing that, be very intentional and think ahead of time. Think about your brand story versus narrative marketing. What are you actually going for? What's important to get? Don't overdo it. Don't film it like you film your kids when they were first born. Like, be very intentional. And a way to do that too is the second point too, take 10-second video clips. If you're gonna do something, just don't move your phone too much. If you're taking it with your phone, let's just say, take these little clipettes, and you can save those. You can pull those together later on. These are your Instagram reels. These are, those different things. So it's just harvest or whatever else that you're doing. It's really helpful. And if you take those 4 photos and you are able to collect those at some point, that gives you enough of a spread that you're telling a different story. Because sometimes you'll see folks and they'll just put like close-up shot. It's all the same kind of genre or whatever else. That only gives people 2 questions maybe. If you put up a variety that allows people to, again, ask more questions and get better answers. And what we really, I think, want to help consumers do is find a better question. If we try to tell them, like, you should, know this and know this one thing, like, that's not going to help them. The whole thing is we need those catalysts that kind of, Omnivore's Dilemma did it for me and some other books too, right? Like, it was those things that got me to then start going around and asking farmers. And to be very fair, a lot of this segment of the food industry we're talking about, it is intimidating. It is very intimidating for a lot of people because they think they're going to ask a stupid question. And so it keeps them from walking up to that booth, walking up to that store, walking up and just asking one more thing. So back to this though, take 10 seconds, just do little clips. If you need to, the best thing to do, I would say, again, trying to be frugal about it, but a Gmail account, and they give you 15, I think, gigs of Google Drive or something like that. You can upload it and just put that somewhere else off of your phone or save it into an album. That way you have it as a reference material so you can go back to it. Same thing, we're talking about using stuff and then a year later. So if you lose it in your phone, like, it'll be in there, but you'll never, ever go back and get it. So try to save it somewhere else or dump that stuff into one central location. If you have an external hard drive, don't bog down your computer. But if you don't have a ton of stuff and it is all photos, I would say use a Google Drive and you can do that yourself. And then same thing, just like I did earlier too, you have people around you. People are coming and visiting the bakery, wherever that is, you can make it accessible to them. Just like we have, signs that people, can scan and then get to your Instagram account. You can do the same thing when people come out and have a visit, a volunteer day, whatever it is too. Just let people know that, hey, if you have it and you find anything, we have a link right here or something like that. You can text it out to the group afterwards, thanking everybody for showing up to whatever event it is. But utilize the other people. And this also comes in with other staff. This is, again, an awkward thing to maybe force your staff to do, so just ask nicely. But if there are other people working with you, just remember, if you're taking all those shots, you're not in it as well. And a big part of this is making sure that you can identify the person. Who is it doing this? And that's really what we want. And that's kind of what I went over earlier, though. A lot of it is just transparency. And that's what we've asked for out of making these better products, that, we want to see the process, know who is doing it, and know that person. So let people be able to do that. And then, I got through the beginning thing fast. We're out of time. What time is it?
You're about
3 o'clock.
15 minutes.
We have 15 minutes.
Fantastic! I did it! Okay, so if you guys want to follow, my name is Daniel James. I don't know if I even did that part. Hi. Everybody calls me DJ. You can call me that. If you guys want to, we're on Instagram. It's just herd.ventures. Otherwise, email me if you have questions. You can follow along on any of these other things. And I leave the rest of the time. Are there a lot of questions?
You missed a digit.
Did I? Where?
581 458.
I like anonymity.
You really don't want us to call it.
I really like anonymity. It's 4458. So 581-4458. Are there any questions or examples?
Yes, what would you say are some pros or cons versus brand story marketing and the other one?
In narrative marketing?
Yeah.
So, actually, that's a great one. I had a slide for it and I didn't use it. So, which one works best for you? So, if your business has ability to resonate, become clear, and more appealing to your customers, is an example of utilizing it. The same thing by marketing your customers as the hero of the story. You're shifting that marketing from being like a self-focused into a new reality. So again, it's, do you want them to see themselves as on a journey and they're going along, and then, the mother that's buying the healthier product for their kid versus, I'm growing this healthy product because of the fact that I had something happen in my life and it caused my health, you know what I mean?
So then what would be the pro of the latter?
The pro of the latter would be, for the more personal angle too. So it's the same thing with I see it as art going up. The biggest pro is that you're allowing people to see themselves through you. So the reality is that both of them are kind of the same thing. You know, like it's
Okay.
the consumer at the end of the day,
Yeah.
but it's whether or not you're having them see you through your lens, and it's whether you're comfortable talking about yourself or not, and whether you have a clear and concise story. So if you don't, then sometimes it's easier just to talk about others, right, and push that off. I think that it's something very strong, and when done well, is to use brand story. It also helps because it's funny when all of us, or whoever has a business in general, we all went through this process of like picking the name was like seemed like the most important thing, but really finding the purpose and the drive. Like, why am I doing this? And when you can really define that for yourself, it helps others find that as well, and they want to help you on that mission. Yeah, there were other pictures in here too. Yeah, it's more of like on the marketing itself. Any other questions?
Can you provide any good examples of like narrative marketing? Because I feel like I can't resonate with that as much as brand story. You know, you've seen the farms and they tell their story.
So a lot of it would be, so narrative marketing much more. Let's say we're doing marketing where it's goat cuddling is a great, I don't have one for weed. I mean, not off the top of my head, but goat cuddling, for instance, right? And people are showing up and then you're talking about the experiences that those people are having and they're being able to interact to understand that cheese better or whatever it is. But on the narrative marketing side, you're talking about the consumer, you know, like, thank you for buying this product. You are making the great decision. You are doing, you know, so that's more of narrative marketing, pushing that element or that focal point onto what the consumer is doing and congratulating them on that decision, if that makes sense. Or like to thank them for supporting, you know, your business and, so, you know, that kind of thing.
The brand is called Go Cuddling.
The what?
Go Cuddling, you said?
Oh, you meant like of a business
Like,
doing
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was talking about goat cuddling in general. There's just cheese farm. It's moved from goat yoga. Now we've moved on to just goat cuddling. In the agritourism world. No, sorry. That's not like a thing. Yeah, it's just a
Goat
thing.
milking is a thing.
Yeah, yes.
Do you have to pick? Can you have like just periods of focus? So you do half a year of narrative and then half a year of brand? Like,
Yeah, so that's what I was saying on one of these too, when you go through like 4 photos that should be a focal point. This is what I've come up with for farmers, millers, bakers, but in terms of what they should focus on in telling their story. And really, it is an amalgam of those elements. So no, it's not just one or the other, but I think it's a very helpful stance when you're trying to think about. What I run into a lot is people can take pretty photos, right? But then they try to think about what to write in the post. That's the hardest part. So that's what I'm getting at, is trying to figure out your narrative story that you're going to tell, and that's where this comes in to be helpful. Think about who is a hero. Does it help to tell your story? Does it help to tell their story? It all leads back to the same place, and in some cases you can combine those. Identify yourself. That's much more brand story. Identify the store. Same thing with brand story, but when you're combining them and when you're giving that consumer perspective, that's much more for them, who is buying that and their journey along the way. You're showing them when they're actually like receiving that item, where they can find it, what that product is. Or again, when I talk about bakers and those too, it's kind of like, don't be afraid to show it before it's baked and then after as well. It allows people to see that full journey and learn something new. One better question goes a long way to an answer. There's another hand.
I love the idea of having a conversation with your consumer and not just providing an information dump, right? A data dump on them. Do you have any tips as far as like how to tee them up to ask the questions that you want to deliver the answer to without being professorial?
Yeah, that's usually a tough one. I mean, I've done everything from like, I'll give you a free postcard if you answer one of my questions. You know, I think a lot of the times it is, I mean, this is just getting to know your consumers, and same thing, you can get feedback nowadays through social. I personally just promote like talking to people in person, but a lot of the times I think distilling it down, making it very simple and concise what you're after. I mean, you can do surveys, that's what I've seen a lot of people do to get feedback. It's just really funny, like even the survey they handed around, there's only a certain amount of people that are here that will fill that out, and it's a certain type, you know what I mean? So you're only extracting only so much of that information. I don't have any like precise tips on how to get that from people, because I work on that every day, and it's just, I mean, I'll talk to people for 5 minutes and then invite them over for potluck dinners or ask them if I can cook with their mother, and then they'll open up to me. So my method is very different on how I get that information. I'll also ask people what their produce patronus is. So it's kind of like not the vegetable that represents them the most, or sorry, not the vegetable that they like the most or that they eat the most, but the one that represents them the most. And then I use that information to pick out what vegetable pictures I'll sell in the gallery. So like I think it's just figuring it out for yourself too. But yeah, I can dive in more to that, but I don't have an exact tip. Yes.
I guess I'm just feeling like we're trying to be concise with a lot of this, right? Like, but I don't know, can you put some, like, what's too much for people to read? What's too much for people to watch?
Okay, so this gets into ADD, which I'm a part of that club. Attention spans are very, 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 very short. So, so a lot of the times, what I'll say on that is, I get told a lot of these rules that you should follow, like I should keep my TikTok and Instagram videos below 15 seconds, and then a year later they go, oh no, they opened it up, so you can put up 5 minutes. I think a lot of this has more to do with, and this is more of an opinion piece, you have to enjoy some of this process of telling the story, because if it feels too much like work and it feels too onerous, it always flatlines, and consumers can see that too. If you feel like writing an entire op-ed piece for like a social media post, I tell people, go ahead and do that. Just make sure, ask yourself the question, what value am I providing in doing that? There's so much fodder on the internet now in terms of content. So when I say be concise, be intentional. If you're putting something out, put that out. Try to collaborate with whoever you can on that. Make sure it gets the widest berth that it can, that it's a value for your time too. But really think about what value am I adding to the customer? Because at the end of the day, there are so many pictures and useless things that people can go through, and then they just check out, and this is why we have super short attention spans. Yeah.
I have a question in regards of if your narrative, like since we're all people and if you focus your story on yourself, at what opportunity or what kind of strategies to change your narrative? So if something changes with you or your products, or you add something or something shifts, what would be a good strategy to kind of like shift that narrative in a way that doesn't deviate too much from what customers are used to, but also still honors that change?
Can you give me an example?
Let's say I'm thinking of examples of like folks who might have started partnering together but no longer partnered. Maybe they add products, maybe they shift their focus from one specific product or one specific crop to another product. Things of that sort.
I got you. So I call this the nonprofit syndrome. So a lot of the times what's difficult, you could be doing so many different things. And I joke about this, but nonprofits have a history kind of like, this is our cause, this is what we're doing, and we do these 12 other things. And we just pivoted all of our money because of this one grant. So that resonates. So it becomes kind of difficult. So I'll get asked to produce videos for sometimes some of those groups, and they go like, these are all the things we do. Again, this comes back to the clear and concise. As much as it hurts a little bit, because most of these people in this room too, pretty much all of you don't have I know there's maybe one thing named on your name tag, but you do a whole bunch of stuff. But at the end of the day, you still have to introduce yourself as something. I go with culinary anthropologist because it's too difficult to say. Well, anyways. The point is though, is being very clear and concise on that. So if you do need to pivot in some sort of way too, just realizing that that's not a one post, that's not a one story. It's again thinking about what is that narrative arc going to be. So how are we going to take people all the way from A to B? And I think a lot of that just comes into figuring out multiple posts. Say you got, like a new executive director, right? Something like that. And it's a major change. They want to change the direction of the organization too. Yeah, so saying something about them in general too can really help. But giving examples of them talking, engaging, same thing. You can go through these 4 things and do that with the same thing. Identify what the change is, right? Identify why the change is happening or the source of that change. Connect those 2 things together, and then you can be able to give the consumer perspective. How is this benefiting them in what way? And same thing, that's also combining a little bit of that narrative marketing and then tying it into the brand story and into narrative marketing. Does that help?
Yeah, that's
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Any others?
Yeah, I'm thinking getting kind of focuses. So if I were to do this work, I'm thinking I would do this on an Instagram post. When would I have the opportunity to show that many images and tell one story?
You mean in terms of the 4?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so what I think about it, I always tell folks this too, like at your farmer's market booth, if you ever vend at anything, it's great to have those printed out, laminated, and just like 4 things, right? And you can set that out anywhere. This also becomes part of your press pack. I always say for every business, if you get reached out to, it's really annoying when you get reached out to and you got to send out like, oh, this is my PNG for my logo, this is my, and these are some shots of where we are. And you can use that for a myriad of reasons, right? And there's different organizations, same thing, conferences, other things like that. When people want to know about you on your website, these would be the 4 photos that one of them should be your banner photo, one of them should be in your About Me page, one of them should be in your, our ingredient, whatever that is. So it can be used for a whole bunch of things.
Your whole press kit.
Yeah, and then again, to send that out to others as well.
I was just gonna add to that, if you can post like multiple pictures at a time too.
Yeah.
So like if you.
Somebody cares, I probably can. I hear where you're coming from.
But yeah, if you have those, I was gonna say, did I have another one after that? No, I think that was last.
But I think what you're saying, bank it so you can use it. Right?
Bank it so you have it already. Fill your content silo, because at the end of the day, even if you have this, what I call a silo fill. So I'll do this for especially farmers, and I do half pay, half barter deals for first time shoots, because farmers do not have marketing budgets. And then what I do is I take all that barter and I put it into dinner events that I put on, and then I get them marketing content of the food already cooked. So like I've had to figure out ways of like working around like clients that have no money, which is fun. But yeah, you can use all of those. Those imagery, but what I'll do is I'll show up and I'll say, I'm gonna get you 45 photos and I'll get you 10 Instagram reels. Don't use them all at once. You can still go out, have a human element. It doesn't all need to be too refined and like professional looking, right? Because again, it's this human story. It depends. If your business is growing and you're selling in stores and other things like that, a little bit different, right? But at the end of the day, you can use all of those when you have a rainy day out on the farm, or say like nothing's happening at the bakery, you had to shut down that day. You can still put something up, and if you start to think about that too, like what is our narrative that we want to tell throughout this quarter, maybe try not to think about for the whole year, think about it quarterly or break it up a little bit. Then you can start saying like, okay, I'm going to use one of these posts. Same thing if you're communicating an ongoing narrative, even though it's just a single post. But think through that too, and like how many days do I actually need to be doing this? How much do I need to engage? If you're consumer facing, direct to consumer, a little bit more than if you're doing wholesale. But if you're doing wholesale, it's still great for those companies or those groups when you meet somebody new that they can go on and reference. And honestly, it's a sense of validation, because people want to check out and just see like, oh good, this human that I talked to is the human that is doing this. And I think that that's actually a very big step that we're kind of coming across, because again, most people don't know how to identify a farmer, a miller, a baker. They don't know what they look like anymore. People still think that farms are like a bucolic scene of a cow with a red barn, And then when they show up and I'll film farmers and it's funny, they'll be like, I'm sorry, the place is a mess. And I'll be like, if it was clean, I'd know you weren't farming. So like, it's okay by me. Let's just use this angle over here. But yeah, any other?
For those that are trying to engage wholesale, how much does the old saying, the customer of my customer is my customer, is true?
How much do they?
So the old saying is the customer of my customer, he is my customer.
Yeah.
Right? So on social media, if you're trying to engage and try to sell grains to a miller, right? How much of that story is how much of a burden do you carry in trying to get the public to know that story, so it makes it easier on the miller, which makes it easier on the baker and consumer? Yeah,
all the way through. So I think that's part of one. It has to do with your budget too, and like what your constraints are. So knowing that too, like I was saying, if you're just selling wholesale to, you're a miller, right, and you're just selling wholesale. I think that there's a little bit, if that's all that you want to get into. And I think you talked about this too, restaurants versus. So you have to have a wider array and kind of touch on each of those too, but looking at those as the end consumer. So if you're going to do that narrative marketing, that's where I think it's the most important. And I do think that if you can tell the whole story all the way through, it's the most powerful, but it's those collaborations. If you built a good relationship. So I do this with farmers markets all the time. They go like, can we make more content for, our vendors? And I go, no, let's get the vendors and show them how in the morning, right when they get there, they get set up, that they post something, and that as soon as they post it, we repost it, and it puts it out to a wider audience, right? And make sure that relationship and what they're doing, that content, this again comes in with any social media. So if any of those end users, those bakers, that's a great opportunity to repost those things. Now, of course, I'm only talking about now social media stuff, but it's also reaching out to them. If you are a baker, a great gift that you can give to, say, that back end too, of like who you're sourcing from, is a couple of shots of the loaves of bread that came from their product. That's a huge value, and that allows them to be able to see that. And same thing. So I believe in kind of not an exchange of, but you can work with folks too, not only on like, hey, when can you deliver to me? When can you work with me on this? Also, how can we work together on marketing? How can we work together on the storytelling of doing this? So that's what I think is usually the most helpful. But I think in terms, I usually just analyze each business differently in terms of, and if you're doing all of it, I still think it's really important then to focus on one stream. So if that was the case, I would probably just drop the wholesale idea in a sense too, and your marketing is just direct to consumer. Because at the end of the day, you're helping them as well, and then it becomes a value add for them that your marketing content that you're making is stuff that they can just repost and use too. And then it also just creates that narrative line too, right? But if it ends there with just them and that product is indistinguishable, then yeah, I would just go with them. Any others?
I have one quick question.
Yeah.
In the way that you talked about kind of like building into those network and those online networks, do you have any kind of like examples of working with folks with large social media platforms who might already be customers or might have some kind of lifestyle brand that they have on social media that will complement your business or your mission?
Like an example of something I've done?
Yeah.
Well, the other month, there's a farmer that's on Mother Earth News, and she's like a representative of that, and we did a sexy farmer calendar shoot. So that was something. And we got a bunch of guys in jorts, and then just did a whole thing. Like, it was just for fun, but it's going to be a calendar for donations.
Oh, was that Amy Rose?
Yeah, that is.
I have that calendar.
Yeah. So next year's is going to have a picture of me with an apple in my mouth next to pigs. So that'll be fun. So, but anyways, that was just a fun opportunity for me, and then same thing, like help her out. Yeah, same thing. Get to know some other folks in the neighborhood, and yeah, I mean, I don't know where that's gonna go, but I should have thought of that beforehand. Because I also do a bunch of like stuff with VDOE and like host a kids show for PBS. So like, I don't know how they're gonna feel about that. But yeah, I think it's just.
Prince was on the Muppets, or he was on Sesame Street.
Yeah, that's a good example. But yeah, I think there's a bunch of examples of that, but it's the same thing. It's not just going for people that like, oh, they have a ton of followers on their account. I think it's really being intentional about, because a lot of us are doing this for very specific reasons. So, you know, emboldening that notion and getting that narrative out there too. So same thing, like I very much appreciate all the people I get the opportunity to collaborate with, and then I try to go out of my way to make sure that they have everything that they need. So that, and I usually just find that does come back. And it is tough because these cameras get big, right? And like all the stuff that you need to do them. But the reality is without a story, there's nothing and there's no point. So if you can find that story and find the other people that you want to collaborate with on that, and same thing, it helps everybody do a better job. So anyways, I think we're out of time. Thank you all for coming in. Appreciate it.